What if Joe Biden stayed in the race? Let's find out. Hi guys, welcome to Politics Enhanced. Thank you all so much for clicking on today's video. And without further ado, folks, today we're going to talk about what would have happened if Joe Biden had stayed in the 2024 race instead of having Kamala Harris take the reins and run in Biden's place. Now, a lot of people could say that Trump would have lost to Biden, but a lot of people also say that Trump would have won by a bigger margin. And the only real way to look at this and to calculate what would have happened is to look at the Electoral Results Map from 2024. So, as we can see, Trump won the popular vote in this scenario. He won 77.3 million votes compared to Kamala Harris's 75 million. And if you look at the map here, we see that Trump flipped 6 states, and he did very good in the Southwest. He did good in Arizona, Nevada, and Georgia, and he handedly won the Rust Belt by bigger margins than he won in 2016. But this does raise the question, what if this election was against Joe Biden? Well, personally, I think Kamala Harris actually helped the Democrats do better in the election than Biden. And the reason why I say this is if you look at Joe Biden's approval rating, we can see currently that Joe Biden has a 38% approval rating. And if we go down to the time of the election, he roughly had about a 41% approval rating. Now, Kamala Harris had a lower approval rating than Joe Biden, but it does beg the question, what would have happened if Biden had stayed in the race? So, in this scenario, we're assuming that Biden didn't drop out and that all the events that happened, with the exception of Biden dropping out, happened. So, we don't know what a second debate against Biden and Trump would have looked like, but it probably wouldn't have been good. So, in this map, California would have been safe Democrat no matter what because Harris won it handedly by 20 points. I do believe that most of the Eastern Seaboard would have been safe, but not all of the Eastern Seaboard. Maine's 1st Congressional District also would have been safe for the Democrats. Hawaii, Colorado, and frankly, folks, I think that is it for the safe Democrat states. As for the safe Republican states that would have voted for Trump, we see the Great Plains states, the great state of Texas. Trump would have probably won it by even more against Biden. Alaska would have been 15 points or more. Florida would have been 15 to 16 points. I think it would have shifted a little bit more to the right. Maine's 2nd Congressional District also would have been safe Republican. And I predict that Donald Trump probably would have won the popular vote by more than just 1.7%. He probably would have won it by about 2 to 3% against Biden. And that definitely would have shifted the map in his favor. So we have 219 safe electoral votes for Donald Trump and 110 safe electoral votes for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. Now I'd like to talk about the likely Democrat states, which there are going to be quite a few. And we're going to start with the West Coast and we're going to go to the East Coast. So west to east. Washington and Oregon in this scenario definitely would have been likely Democrat states. Biden is unpopular. He did not legalize weed. And I don't remember if he promised to do that, but that's definitely a big issue in the Pacific Northwest. And if we look at the 2024 election results, we see that Harris only won Oregon by 15 points and Washington by 19 points. So Biden would have done a bit worse in these two states. Probably he would have won Washington by a safe margin, but Oregon would have been within 10 points. And we're going to skip over the Southwest and we're going to go to Illinois. That also would have been a likely Democrat state. The reason why is the Chicago suburbs trended heavily Republican, and as we can see in Chicago or Illinois, we see that Harris only won by 11 points. So definitely if Trump did a couple points better, that would have been a likely state within 10 points. Probably Biden would have only won it by 7 to 8%, as Democrat turnout would have been abysmally worse for Biden than for Harris. In addition to that, I think we can also go up to New York and confidently say that Trump would have gotten within 10 points of winning the state of New York. If we look at New York as a whole, Harris only won it by 12 points. If Trump did a couple points better in the popular vote, especially in the New York region, we definitely could have seen some type of a shift, and New York would have been much closer, probably an 8 to 9 point win for Biden as opposed to a 12-point win for Harris, which is already abysmal. And that is it for the likely Democrat states. So now we're going to take a look at the likely Republican states, which there would be quite a few. Looking at Nevada and starting in the West, I would say that Trump would have won the state of Nevada anywhere from 6 to 8 points if it was against Biden. He was very unpopular there, definitely not liked in the Vegas, Reno suburbs, and it would have harmed Biden down ballot significantly. Plus, if Trump did a couple points better in the national popular vote, that would have handedly given him Nevada. He probably would have won Reno County at that rate, and he also probably would have pretty much won Vegas, or it would have been a 50-50 tie. As for Arizona, same deal. That would have been a likely Republican state. In this scenario, it still was likely Republican against Kamala Harris, but I think that Trump would have won Arizona by a bigger margin. Instead of 5 points, perhaps he would have won it by 7 points. He would have done better in Maricopa County. He probably would have also done better in the border counties, Santa Cruz and Pima County, to name a few, and that would have helped Donald Trump win Arizona by a bigger margin, and he probably would have done better as well with Hispanic American voters against Biden. So Arizona would have been likely Republican for Donald Trump in this scenario. And looking at the map, we can also go down to the great state of North Carolina, which also would have been likely for Donald Trump in this scenario. Biden was not liked in North Carolina. Democrats have always lost the state every 4 years, with the exception of 2008 with Barack Obama. So looking at North Carolina, this time around, Trump won it by 3. I think if it was against Biden, it would have been a 5 to 6 point win. That's also including the fact that Trump had done better in the popular vote. He would have done a little bit better in the suburban areas and gotten better turnout, while Biden would have had less turnout. And finally, I think the state of Georgia would have also been likely against Joe Biden. The reason why I say this is, even though Biden did win it in 2020 by the slimmest of margins, Trump doing a little bit better in the popular vote handedly would have given him the state of Georgia, and he probably also would have seen a reversion of the Democrat trends in the Atlanta metro area that keeps shifting more and more left. You probably would have seen a little bit of a halt, or maybe even a rightward trend like in DeKalb County, but it's hard to tell. And all in all, Georgia, it was lean in this scenario, but in our alternate timeline, Georgia would have been a likely Democrat Republican state. And that's it for the likely states. So pretty much the Sun Belt in this scenario would have been likely Republican. Georgia would have been a 5-point win probably for Trump. It would have been Trump's 2016 margin against Biden. So now looking at the map, we are left with the lean and tilt states, and I want to start with the lean states first and then work our way to the tilt states. So first of all, we're going to start with the state of Virginia, because Virginia was much closer this election cycle. In fact, Harris only won it by 6. If it was against Biden, I think that state would have been much closer, and I think it would have been a Biden +3 margin. You do have a lot of establishmentarian politicians up in the northern part, and that does dictate the state's politics. However, Biden wasn't popular with his own party, so if he stayed, there wouldn't have been a lot of enthusiasm to turn out for Biden. Remember, Biden's biggest problem was not necessarily his approval. It was the fact that people were coming to vote for Biden only in spite of Trump. People voted for Trump because they love Trump, and that's a big difference in enthusiasm right there. So Virginia would have been probably a 3-point win for Biden. It would have been a lean Democrat state. And I would also argue that Maine at large would have been a lean Democrat state as well. It is very elastic down ballot, but it is New England. It is more left-leaning. Harris won it by 7. I think that would have been cut in half if it was Joe Biden. So Biden would have won Maine at large probably by 3 to 4 points, but it would have been much closer if it was Biden instead of Harris. And as for the lean Republican states, there are going to be quite a few on this map. First and foremost, the state of Pennsylvania and its 19 electoral votes. It was called on election night. Pennsylvania would have gone to Trump, I think, by 2.5 to 3 points if it was against Biden. Biden didn't have that Scranton Joe appeal that he had the first time around. He had a lot of baggage, the Afghanistan crisis, the border crisis, his terrible foreign policy and economic decisions have really hurt working class Americans, and they would have come out for Trump in droves. They already did, and you also have to remember that the Amish came out and voted heavily for Trump, which helped him in the state of Pennsylvania, and actually it also helped in the Senate election as well. People forget that, but the Amish came out in high numbers. I still think he would have seen that if it was against Biden, but I also think he would have seen more of a shift for Trump and less people would have turned out for Biden. So I would say in this scenario, Pennsylvania would have been a 2.5 to 3 point win, and you could also say that in the state of Michigan as well, you would have seen less of a turnout for Biden, specifically in the Detroit metro area. They already didn't turn out for Harris, as we can see here on the map. Detroit, which is a very heavily Democrat county, actually shifted Republican from 2020, which was a blue wave year, but nevertheless, Michigan would have been probably a 2.2 victory for Donald Trump in this scenario. And in neighboring Wisconsin, I would also argue the same deal. I think Wisconsin, it was the closest of the Rust Belt trio, which surprises me, but as we can see in Wisconsin against Harris, Trump won by pretty much 1%. I think it would have been different against Biden if it was Biden and Trump in Wisconsin. Trump would have won easily by 2% or more. So the Rust Belt would have been lean Republican and the Sun Belt would have been likely Republican. And now we're left with, in my opinion, the tilt states, the states that would have been won by under 1% in this scenario. And we're actually left with quite a few states. So looking at the map, we're going to start with the state of New Mexico. Because folks, I think something is happening in New Mexico, and I do think that it is shifting more and more Republican. You do see the Albuquerque area that has a lot of Democrat votes, and Santa Fe as well. However, I did make a video before the election talking about if New Mexico is winnable for Republicans in the future. And I do believe that it is a winnable state. Would it have gone red in 2024 if it was against Joe Biden? I would argue yes. And the reason why is New Mexico is an oil state. And what Biden has done with the high energy prices and gas prices has absolutely decimated the economy of New Mexico, which, by the way, is one of the poorest states in the union. People often forget that because when they see New Mexico, they think of Santa Fe and Albuquerque, but it is a high poverty state. I do think that the people who were below the poverty line in New Mexico probably would have preferred Trump over Biden, but I think Harris kind of softened the image of Biden because she wasn't Biden, but she was also easily dislikable. But New Mexico, I think, could have had the potential to flip, especially if Trump did a few points better in the popular vote. Next, we're going to go up to Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. This was pretty close. Kamala Harris won by 2, so I think against Biden it would have been pretty even and a true toss-up, but nevertheless, I think Trump would have won it by less than a few hundred votes probably. It would have been very close. And that leaves us with Minnesota, New Jersey, and New Hampshire. So with the state of Minnesota, I am a believer that Republicans can win it, but it is very close always. And it's an elastic state, but it's elastic for the Democrats, not really for the Republicans. And the reason why is the twin cities, the twin metro area, Minneapolis to be exact, is the reason why the state is still Democrat leaning. You also don't have high turnout in the rural areas, which does affect the state. However, I don't know if Biden could have done good enough to win the state of Minnesota, but I do think that he ultimately would have probably won it by a tilt margin just because Minnesota always votes Democrat. They voted for Biden in 2020 when half their city burned down. I wouldn't be surprised if Minnesota had voted for Biden again in 2024. They just are Democrat leaning, and it would have been much closer, probably less than 1%, but still. Nevertheless, that leaves us with New Jersey and New Hampshire. So in this scenario, I do think New Jersey would have been much closer, but I think it would have been tilt. It would have been under 2% for Joe Biden. And the reason why is, again, Joe Biden wasn't popular anywhere, period. I do think that the urban and rural turnout for Donald Trump in the state of Pennsylvania probably would have bled over into the state of New Jersey, and New York shifting Republican probably would have crossed over into New Jersey as well. So you probably would have seen New Jersey be a 1.5% victory for Joe Biden. And that leaves us now with the state of New Hampshire. Now, historically speaking, New Hampshire hates incumbents. It voted for Harris by 3%. I think in this scenario, it would have flipped to Donald Trump. New Hampshire, if you look at its voting history, has always disliked incumbents. And while it hasn't flipped Republican in recent years, Trump almost won it back in 2016. Then in 2020, it voted for Biden by 8%. You could also look at 2008 and 2012 to prove this point. So all in all, New Hampshire would have flipped Republican, and I think Trump would have won it by just a few thousand votes, and it would have been more of the working class vote that would have came and delivered the state of New Hampshire for Donald Trump. So all in all, Trump would have improved slightly if it was against Biden. You probably would have seen a 1 to 2% shift in the popular vote, and New Mexico and New Hampshire would have flipped Republican. Maybe Minnesota could have also flipped Republican against Biden, but I just don't see how that could have happened given the history of Minnesota. The Rust Belt would have been lean, the Sun Belt would have been likely, with the exception of New Mexico that would have probably flipped Republican, and New Hampshire in the Northeast that would have flipped with Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District. The blue states would have been closer, and it would have been a bigger electoral college victory for Donald Trump. So thank you all for listening to my alternate history video, and remember to please like, comment, and subscribe. Hit that notification bell down below so you don't miss another video, and until next time, Politics Enhanced out.